Good morning, everyone. Today, our lecture for environmental issues is going to focus on water pollution. Earlier this week, we talked about air pollution. Water pollution is the addition of any substance that degrades or lowers the quality of water for living organisms. There are two different types of water pollution. There is point source water pollution and non-point source water pollution. Point source water solution has a single discharge site, such as a sewage outlet pipe pictured beside us here. Non-point source pollution comes from multiple small sources, such as cars leaking oil, fertilizer runoff from lawns, etc. So when we talked about air pollution, we talked about the Clean Air Act of 1970 and then how it was amended in 1990. There was also a Clean Water Act. And so this law was passed in 1977, and it set limits for types and amounts of pollutants that could be discharged into surface waters. This law was passed really in regards to public outcry because there were multiple instances of the Cuyahoga River in Ohio catching fire, which was really damaging the water as well as the air. The Clean Water Act requires states to develop lists of impaired waters that are too polluted or degraded to meet water quality standards, and really about 1/3 of all U.S. surface waters are considered impaired. So all the red on this map here is going to show you the surface waters that are considered impaired because they're too polluted. The most common cause of impaired water are coliform bacteria, and these are organisms that are going to originate in our intestinal tracts as well as in other animals' intestinal tracts. And if you end up drinking this water, it's going to cause diarrhea, food poisoning, and other illnesses. You might see beach closures because of this bacteria, where it says, stay out of the water. There's also, in Presque Isle, if you guys remember when we went to Presque Isle in 9th grade, their beaches usually end up closing because of where they're located on the peninsula. And, there's bacteria that gets stuck in there, and then it ends up causing people to get sick. So they end up closing some of those beaches each year. Heavy metal pollution is going to include all metals with a high relative atomic mass. And so mercury accumulates in living tissues, causing nerve damage. So you might hear of tuna or something that might have, they've been exposed to too much mercury, and so you could get, mercury poisoning because eating too much tuna that's been exposed to it. Iron, manganese, and copper are also common metal contaminants that enter water as part of acid mine drainage. Nutrient pollution is the addition of compounds containing nitrogen and phosphorus to the water, and sources of this are really runoff from fertilizer, from agricultural fields or lawns or golf courses. Soaps and detergents may have high amounts of phosphorus. And then nitric acid, whenever nitrogen oxides are put into the atmosphere from coal burning power plants and vehicle exhaust, it's going to react with that vapor and cause nitric acid to form, which is going to come down in acid rain. And so that's also going to contribute to this nutrient pollution. There's also cultural eutrophication, and it's an overgrowth of algae in water that occurs as a result of nutrient pollution. So you might have these algae blooms, and so you can see in this picture here lots of algae growing as a result of this pollution. There's also oxygen depleting pollution in the water, and this is going to include any organic matter that's going to promote the growth of decomposing bacteria, and that bacteria is going to use up the dissolved oxygen in the water, and so other aquatic life is not going to have the oxygen that they need. And so dead plants and algae in the water are going to contribute to this, as well as raw sewage. This creates a dead zone where oxygen concentration is so low that animal life basically just suffocates and dies. PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, are a group of synthetic chemicals, and they were really used from 1929 to 1979 in the manufacturing of paints, plastics, electrical, and hydraulic equipment. These are non-degradable, and they'll actually accumulate in aquatic organisms. So you can see all these different types of fish here, and these fish commonly have these PCBs inside of them. And so it's telling you like approximately how many meals per month, like if you were to eat them, you would be like, or how many meals per month you should eat, like maximum, because otherwise you could get, contaminated because of these PCBs, and they just stay in these living organisms. It's telling you right here, like lake trout basically don't eat because they're so contaminated. Same thing with the channel catfish and the carp. It's just not healthy. Sediment pollution is going to include any type of particles of like sand, silt, and clay that are going to enter the water because of erosion from nearby land. Now, sediment is normal, but too much of it is going to increase the turbidity or the cloudiness of the water, which is going to prevent sunlight from getting in, and like smaller invertebrate organisms that need that sunlight won't be able to see it because the water is just too cloudy. Acid pollution includes any substance that's going to lower the pH of water below its normal levels. So, water should have a pH of 7. Granted, that's like in the best outcome. That's not necessarily ideal or realistic. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, meaning it's going to be more basic, or it could be a little bit lower because it's more acidic. Typically, stream water is more acidic because of different pollutions, whether that's because of acid rain or things like that. But also acid mine drainage is going to contribute to this, as well as acid precipitation, like I just mentioned. Pesticide pollution is also going to contribute to water pollution. And so pesticide pollution is the runoff of anything that's sprayed on like agricultural lands. That's going to be insecticides or herbicides. And when they run off into nearby streams, it's polluting the water. So you can see here in this picture, this farmer is putting pesticides on his wheat field, and it's so close to that stream nearby. So that stream is basically like guaranteed to be polluted or contaminated. Other sources besides all agricultural pesticides is like residential mosquito spraying and the use of herbicides. So you might be using, or someone in your family, like you might have like weeds in your driveway or like in your garden or something. You might use a pesticide or an herbicide such as Roundup. That's very common. So I know we're talking about pollution, but something to just be aware of is there has been this Safe Drinking Act that has been passed. And so this is really setting limits and testing guidelines for contaminants in drinking water. And so some of the things that the utility companies test for on a regular basis is heavy metals, microorganisms, any water treatment byproducts or radioactive substances, and then other chemicals. And they're required to set out alerts. So they must notify customers whenever these tests come back that indicate levels above acceptable levels, which is kind of scary because, it's above acceptable levels. So there is some exception or like allowed amount of all of these different things, whether it's heavy metals, microorganisms, water treatment byproducts, like some of that is allowed in the water. Obviously it's small amounts, but once it reaches a level that, is no longer acceptable, the water company has to put out an alert. So this here's a picture of in Detroit, Michigan. You might have heard about like the Flint, Michigan water crisis and how there was high levels of lead in it. And this is not just here, this is in many parts of the country. But so they put out something like you have to boil your water before you can drink it. So this has happened here in Pittsburgh. Yeah, so we're going to stop there. Next week, we're going to look more at some other water pollution, more so in the ocean. All right, guys, have a wonderful week. And as always, if you need any help on anything, please let me know. And I'm always happy to oblige. Have a great weekend.